It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! Feedback Friday. Okay, first thing I want to do. There's been one or two people continuing to comment telling me to get a microphone. They don't like the headset. Back in the day, years ago, not quite years, at least over a year ago, I used to use a desktop microphone like this, and people complained about that too. So Rich over at Review Tech USA sent me this headset. The people that didn't like that microphone prefer the sound with this better. So I am keeping this because I think that it's better to have consistent sound. The complaint before was every time I moved away from the microphone, you notice I move around a lot, people would lose volume on my voice. And I don't know why anybody cares if I'm wearing ear cans. Like, I really don't. If it offends you that much, just listen to the audio. Don't watch the video. I don't wear a headset on Lady Bits. And it's a gaming headset. I talk about video games and I talk about issues related to video games. I don't know why anybody's offended by me wearing a headset, why that bothers anybody that much. But it's not changing. So commenting, if it makes you feel better, if it's some sort of self-soothing exercise, go ahead. I'll take the engagement, but it's not changing because this was the change. Okay, moving on. The video on Monday about, John McCain memorials, reminding me why I love my conservative friends. Some people decided to make that about their issues with John McCain and the concept of war in general. That wasn't the purpose of the video, so I'm not going to respond to those comments. Whatever. You have your strong opinions. I don't see the need to continue to spit on the guy when he's dead. He can't vote for any more wars, so that's just bitterness. But there were some interesting comments that involved a lot of nuance, and I'm just going to take a lot of it had to do with the idea of privilege, and the general consensus seemed to be based on my question about, is there another word? Some people said they'd never heard privilege explained that way before, and explained that way, it actually makes a lot more sense, and they're okay with the word. They don't like the weaponization of the word, which I totally understand. I don't like the weaponization of the word either. Drilling down, there seems to be this idea, since privilege has broken containment from academic settings into general usage, that privilege is something that somebody can control. And quite a few people pointed out the idea, if you're born white in a white majority country and get treated better by institutions because you're white, how is that your fault? And this is the problem with weaponizing the concept. Of course, it's not your fault. It's just a question of being aware that the system, under current circumstances, is not equal for everyone. And the idea of a white American or a white Canadian or a white anywhere being treated as more American or Canadian or whatever country than somebody who's not white. It's just sort of being aware of that, so you're part of the solution, not part of the problem. That's all it really is. Just be aware that it is different, to be a bit more thoughtful about the fact that there's certain assumptions you don't have to think about. And, people pointed out that around the world, you go to Japan and you go to China, white people are a minority. There's, the treatment of gaijin in Japan when people go over and teach at schools. It's an interesting thing because it's definitely outsider status. But somebody else brought up the idea of confusing white privilege and class privilege. And man, I've been diving into this lately, and the research on racial privilege versus class privilege is all over the map. There've been some really rotten studies done. Um, the the interesting thing is, I think that anyone who has to live in a modern society acknowledges that class privilege is a real thing. The problem is that programs designed to kind of rebalance or lessen the divide regarding socioeconomic privilege haven't worked. And that's the really interesting thing. Programs that have improved racial diversity in universities or companies or things like that, those have worked. Like, we have seen diversity increasing. But I don't know if you saw that major thing the New York Times put it a while back, that people who are new money or people who start doing well are more likely to end up worse off than their parents than people that come from generational money that your socioeconomic class tends to correct. But then there's race and all that stuff. And I mean, just anecdotally, sort of where I come from the old, Jane Finch hood, I really think that has to do with one's relationship with money. That if you're born into a well-off family, and this is true, I know people who are not white who have the same thing. I mean, I saw it even in the difference between classes in the kids I went to school with who came from Jamaica. I've talked about this before. Big difference between people who went through the British school, sort of the colonialized system, and then the people who were more traditionally island. But you have a different relationship with money. You have a different relationship with stuff. You have a different relationship with how you carry your wealth. And that is tough, because that's not just life skills. That's like the morality of wealth. And that's why I believe that there are certain basics, things like healthcare, things like, stuff like that shouldn't be about whether you can afford it. I think everyone should have access to those things. Again, Canadian perspective. We've had socialized medicine since, I'm going to get this wrong, but the 1960s. We've had single payer healthcare since then. And up here, any system that doesn't have that seems bizarre to us. And that's just our perspective. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. That's just the normalized perspective in Canada. Because healthcare is our number one issue. Canadians are fiercely protective of healthcare. I suspect that cost of education is going to start vying for that. But this is kind of a segue into some of the other stuff. There was sort of a theme, unintentionally, this week of sort of privilege and social justice, and what do these words actually mean, and what's the right direction. And somebody asked me what my sort of philosophical model is. He thought it would be, I think it was a him, thought it would be easier to understand my perspective if he knew what philosophical model I subscribe to. And I didn't know how to answer his question, because I sort of don't align neatly, because I've read so much. Any structure, any system gets ridiculous to me. I think if you apply it too rigidly, now some would claim that means I'm an intuitive model philosopher, but I'm not. I do have certain rules that I apply to for myself, and I forget the name for outcomes, like just if it's a good outcome, then it's just, if it's a bad outcome, then it's not just. But that doesn't line up completely either. I do think that there are certain things that are just the right thing to do, even if you suffer personally. Now, granted, one could claim that's because you think you will get a good result in the long run, but I don't believe that. I think that we live in an age where we're good people, where moral people just keep getting kicked and kicked and kicked and kicked and kicked. And the only reward is being able to sleep at night. Because I can't even claim that, well, when someone falsely accuses you, people won't believe them because you've been consistent. Unfortunately, I'm living proof that that's not even true. Past actions can be interpreted in a lot of weird and wonderful ways and retroactively rewritten to serve the fashion of the day. And I really do think what's done it for me, and this is going to tie into something I'm going to say on the comments to the Wil Wheaton video, but it just, the idea of objective truth and the idea of objective right and wrong keeps me sane and insulates me against gaslighting. And whether you claim this is sort of a universalist approach, hi Binky, there's Binky's tail, hey bud, whether you believe that's sort of a universalist approach because you believe in universal right and wrong, universal truth, that's one thing. Whether you believe that's sort of a realist, rationalist approach where it's about the outcome, both, neither, all of the above, I don't know. You kind of get to a point where labels are unhelpful, and I think we spend too much time classifying stuff and not enough time working towards solutions, because classifying stuff will get you tenure and solutions will get you yelled at. So that was glib and a joke, but there's an element of truth to it, right, Binky? Right. I do want to apologize for some people didn't think I was clear in my explanation of the Wil Wheaton situation. It was so long and so convoluted, and there was so much backstory to it that I am constantly, when I summarize these things, torn between the reality that if I summarize and generalize for brevity, people get mad at me. If you say one thing that they perceive to be at all inaccurate, they get stuck on that and don't focus on your larger point. It's just, you're wrong on that, so your entire argument is invalid. So I try to avoid that, but that makes summaries difficult. And so I see how a lack of clarity has resulted from attempting to not say anything generalized to the point of inaccuracy. And I apologize for that. I admit I also didn't think anybody would care about this video unless they already knew what was going on. That was a false assumption. So I apologize for the lack of clarity. These things are Kobayashi Marus in some ways. You have to pick how you're going to fail. I failed the right way for some people and in a way that got other people lost. So I will watch that in future. Sometimes it's just really hard, especially like in this situation where you're dealing with a niche social media site that a lot of people don't understand, and then personality politics, but also a big heaping of what I thought it was important about the whole thing, which was that Wil Wheaton actually did do something wrong. And instead of playing the victim, he should be apologizing, and he's not. But the one thing I did suspect, so you'll know I'm apologizing for this. People out there claim I never admit I'm wrong and I'm never apologize for anything. This is one of these things I remember I said before, it doesn't matter how many times you've done something in the past, someone will claim you've never done it. This is the big thing with me, that people claim I never admit I'm wrong. I never apologize for things. It's not true, but it's an easy thing to fling at somebody. Another point for the record that will get ignored because it's inconvenient. But the one thing I knew people were going to get mad at, because people get mad at this every time I talk about it. And I really think this is an issue of communication being more of an art than a science, no matter how much we want to quantify communication. There are elements of qualitative shared meaning that make communicating difficult sometimes. And people got mad at me for saying that mental illness could be overcome. And based on the comments, they seem to take overcome as being synonymous with cured. And I did not mean it that way. Every time, you're having a bad day because of depression and you get out of bed, that is overcoming your depression. Every time you're feeling an attack of anxiety, but you go and do the thing anyway, that is overcoming anxiety, right? Every time you work through a PTSD trigger, that is overcoming PTSD. It is not a cure. Mental health is not, that's why I say, I don't like the paradigm of mental illness, mental health. One of the things I love about the whole discussion around PTSD is the idea of referring it to an injury. Because at least in my experience, the treatment for it was a heck of a lot more like an injury than an illness. Like, it's not a virus or a bacteria where they give you antibiotics or an antiviral and it kills all the stuff and then you're okay. Reducing viral counts sort of thing. It really is more like a limb that gets broken. And if it's not set properly after the initial illness, it never quite works right. And sometimes you have to go in there and like re-break the bone, or cut into the soft tissue to remove the scar tissue so that you have better functioning moving forward. And sometimes it's never completely right. I mean, I have a knee that's never completely right, but it's sure better than it was before I had surgery. Just because it's at like 80%, some days 60%, is better than, the 40, 50%. You aim for improvement. And I really think that, the people that got mad at that and like, stop saying that. I am torn here because I want to be sensitive. I want to appreciate people's sensitivities, but I cannot agree to the idea that, well, if you're diagnosed with depression or you're diagnosed with PTSD or anxiety or anything like that, it's just a lifelong curse that you have to suffer through. It can't be overcome. That has not been my experience. That has not been my story. That doesn't mean it's hard, and that doesn't mean it's not hard, and that doesn't mean it's going to be a straight line. It's messy, and you wander around lost for a while until you find something that works for you. But the fight is hard. Fighting through it and finding the solution that works is exceptionally difficult. Overcoming that stuff has been... It wasn't as hard as going through the traumatic event, but overcoming the PTSD was the third hardest fight I've ever had to do, because it links back to the original trauma. And I mean, in my case, overshare time. The interesting thing about PTSD is they'll be like an adult experience that kind of knocks you off an otherwise precarious ledge. People who have had past trauma, especially early life trauma, are more at risk of developing PTSD after a traumatic event as an adult. And in my case, I actually had some repressed memories that started popping up when I was around 30, so around 10 years ago. That was fun, let me tell you, because at first you're not sure if they're real. And then you start realizing, no, that actually happened. And you have to sort of get through this process of self-gaslighting. Like, no, that couldn't possibly happen. Where the heck did that come from? You eventually work through it. It eventually reforms because your brain is healing. But I don't know if you guys have had that experience where something's healing and it either itches or aches until the healing process is complete. The mind is very similar that way. And that's a crappy thing to have to go through, because you become temporarily less functional so that you can be long-term, ideally functional, or best for you functional. And if you don't have a support system around you that understands that and can support you through it, that is very difficult. The hardest thing, the thing I rejected at first and eventually came around to realize that the trauma counselor I had was right, was that, she kept telling me, if people aren't good for you, if people are making you feel wrong, I say feel wrong instead of feel bad, because sometimes you screw up and you deserve to feel bad. It's a learning experience. But feel wrong, the idea that there are people that make you feel defective instead of just someone with a challenge, they have to go. And at first I rejected that, because I believed in this, myth of ostracize no one because I was ostracized. The golden rule can kind of warp in that regard. And eventually I realized, would I want people, just tolerating me all the time and never enforcing rules and never telling me when something's bothering them because they think I'll just freak out, I won't be able to handle it? No, I wouldn't want that. So why am I tolerating it from other people? And the counselor was right. A lot of people had to go. A lot of people had to go from my life. And I actually discovered that the not healthy people around me were actually preventing me from having relationships with healthier people, with more grown-ups, because you are judged by the company you keep, and people didn't want to be a part of that. And somebody on the other videos said, conventions sound horrible. I don't know why anybody goes to them. It's interesting how everything dovetailed this week, because that was one of the things I had to do. I had to back away from convention running and that large network of a giant small town of international fandom. I have this kind of sensation when certain names pop up in these ongoing Gamergate and Comicsgate controversies, because it's them, oh god, this is 20-year-old Worldcon drama just spilling out yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. And I think that might be why I have sort of a somewhat unique perspective on things, which can best be described as anybody who's read the Marvel Civil War comic, not the movie, which was a ton of fun. The comic where, Iron Man's faction and Captain America's faction were fighting each other, and the Punisher was like, you're all screwed. I'm out of here. I feel like the Punisher most days, because of course, the stupid ending of that is they're ready for the big fight, and they've all drawn battle lines and everything like that. And then Captain America just puts down his shield and walks away. And it was what? It was a horribly unsatisfying ending. The poignancy that they were attempting just didn't work, either artistically or philosophically. And fans were really upset. But yeah, I feel like the Punisher a lot of time in the fact that I'm I don't agree completely with any of you. I'm hanging around, the Cap camp because you're better than the alternative, but I still think you guys are blind in a lot of ways. That's how I feel about a lot of these issues, and I won't call them drama because there's some very real stuff underpinning it all. But that is getting back to me saying to these commenters, I understand it is hard because I have been there. I understand it is hard to hear that the hardest challenge you are currently facing has a solution when you are so far down you can't hear the way out. You can't see the way out. I have been there. It is it is sometimes a comforting idea to give up and say, this is the new normal. And it is perfectly okay to do that temporarily. So one person talked about the fact that they had to stop therapy for a while because they went from having a great therapist to a lousy one. Totally valid choice. That is part of your process. But it doesn't have to be that way forever. And every person has to decide for themselves what their priorities are. If this is something you can live with, then you are overcoming it. You are functioning on a day-to-day basis. But if you are non-functional, if your anxiety or depression or your trauma or whatever is preventing you from experiencing joy, from getting the most you possibly can out of life, you do deserve better. You do not have to accept that this is all you can expect out of life. You do deserve better. You are worth better. And that's what I mean by overcoming it. I don't mean cure. And I just think that that making, depression something while you're stuck with it, it just leaves people without hope. So I understand your perspective. I hope you can understand mine. Because I want to move on to the safe space thing because I don't have much time left. This was interesting. The comments to this one were interesting because I realized that most people don't actually know what safe spaces are. And I think that includes the people who are setting these policies. Your therapist's office, whether in group or individual therapy, for example, is supposed to feel a safe space. It's supposed to feel like a safe space. It's supposed to be a place where you don't feel attacked. Ideally, your family should be a safe space. When it's not, that causes trauma. That causes a violation of boundaries. It's really all about boundaries. It's all about having a place that you can retreat to where you do not feel actively under attack. For a lot of people, video games are a safe space, which is why they react so strongly to attacks on their identity, immutable characteristics that they can't control in the kind of community of gaming, on the topic of gaming. Public spaces like parks, like conventions, there is not, obviously safe space in terms of well-being. Yes, we expect public spaces to be physically safe places. It is not fair to expect that public spaces are free from challenge. Now, that doesn't mean that people should be able to make openly transphobic remarks, openly racist remarks. No. That's just, it offends our morality collectively in the modern age. But this idea that it's going to be safe from ideas that make you uncomfortable, or that people are rightly barred, segregated because of things they can't control, like whether they are male, female, or anything in between, or outside of that, that's not right. That defies the idea of a public space. And this whole convention safe space idea it comes down to the fundamental question of whether conventions are a public or a private space. And the unfortunate thing is they exist in sort of a gray area between both. They are more public than, say, a small group of 10 to 15 people doing a coffee clutch and talking about the book of the week. They are not government institutions, for instance. They are not fully public parks. You pay admission. They reserve the right to refuse service to anybody. But in terms of the actual rules, the codes of conduct for those conventions, I believe philosophically that nobody should be barred from any panel because of immutable characteristics, and that includes being cisgendered men. Now, some people said that even trans men were being barred from that PAX panel. I don't know. can't confirm that. But I do think there can be little side activities that are specifically like, hey, come and meet other people who are trans or other women in or whatever. And I don't see, I mean, there's the argument that there's no need to have come meet other male, white male fans because there's so many. You can do that. That's one thing. But, for instance, barring cisgender men from attending a League of Legends panel, and that's just an example, I just philosophically oppose that. I philosophically and rationally oppose that. I oppose that on all counts. I just think it's wrong-headed. This does not mean that I don't believe that people shouldn't have a place that they feel is safe, that they can retreat to when life gets hard. There is a happy medium between life never being hard and having a place that's safe. And we seem incapable as a culture in this day and age of actually finding a happy medium between the two. I mean, I like that you guys challenge me on things. That's what Feedback Friday is all about, right? Like, now, is this a safe space or not? Some people are like, I like that you don't judge me just because I have views that are different from yours. Some people would call that a safe space. I don't. I think that is respectful public discourse because disagreement is allowed. And the funny thing is the definition of a safe space, in some safe spaces, disagreement is allowed. Attacks aren't. But if somebody thinks any disagreement is an attack, you see the problem with these terms? And that's why on Lady Bits, on my more structured programming, I always make sure I define terms right off the top of the show. People argue with me about that, which, I mean, the whole dialectic I am using, the whole rhetorical thing I am using is the idea that for the purposes of this program, this is the meaning of this word. So we're all on the same page. And some people still fight that. There's nothing I can do about that. YouTube is not a safe space. I'm fine with that. But sometimes I do just need a break and go to places where someone isn't constantly busting my balls on minutiae. And that's what I have single player video games for. That's how I see safe spaces. I know that's not how it's used. And I just think that at some point we all need to collectively need a safe space from extremism in all forms. Like, nuance is a thing. Middle ground is a thing. The fact that I see radically moderate as a term used now, it's like, oh my freaking God, or radically centrist. It's too far. It's gone too far. The definitions have gone too far. Remember I said, I think sometimes we have to stop worrying about what we label something and figure out how to solve a problem, but labeling gets you tenure and solutions get you yelled at. That's the age we live in. We have to become a solutions-oriented age. And the issue is that for certain engineering safe spaces, some people are used to just spitballing solutions and everybody understanding what that is. And then you go out in the real world and you get in trouble like guys like James Damore did, the guy that got fired from Google. And I guess this summarizes, again, comes around to this idea of some people are just toxic and you have to decide. And I hate that term, toxic people. I think you should just be able to say bad people. Some people are bad people. They manipulate circumstances to get more control over other people. That is a bad person to me, or it's certainly a bad habit. You have to decide how much attending something is worth to you. And I personally believe in practicing a form of limited social capitalism. I don't buy in to events that I think do stupid things that exclude people. And I'm going to vote with my wallet. And that's true of games, and that's true of conventions and everything like that, because you don't really need them. That's not the same as not being able to access government services or be heard by your congressman or your MP here, right? It's different. And I think once we get over this idea that there's something horribly wrong if you just think certain conventions or expos or whatever have stupid rules and you don't want to reward that, I think the best thing you can do is vote with your pocketbook, because if people are fine with it, whatever, let them do that, right? The nice thing about the internet is that you don't need their rules. There are plenty of communities out there, but I should be able to go. The thing is, we get all our news on the internet anyway. It's not even something where you get a sneak peek. So if you're the most diehard fan, it's all going to be on the internet anyway. And you can find a place you're more comfortable in that has shared values, has a shared view of the world, and shared core values. And by core values, I mean how you approach a problem, not what you may believe at any given time, which does change over your life. And I think that's really the best way to allow maximum freedoms for maximum people, because I want the right to believe what I believe, what is truly in my heart and what is truly in my head. I want the right to believe what I believe and think what I think and be able to change my mind if I think it's warranted. But that means I need to make space for people who don't agree with me. And I think if everybody realized that those two things are inseparable, that you can't have one without the other, we'd have a lot less of these stupid fights, right? Like, just not everything is worth freaking out over. I get why everything's so reactive. I'd like to focus on overcoming that reactivity. How do you think we do that? I know this is long, and I know a lot of you haven't watched till the end here or listened to the end because you can't stand my evil-looking headphones. How do you think we go to a place where people can disagree without all the freaking out? And what topics would you like to see coming up? Because I'm going to have to keep pre-recording for the next few weeks. I think it's time I actually explained what's going on right now instead of being like, hinting at it. I've been hesitant to say things too soon because of security and privacy reasons. But it's kind of getting the point. Maybe I'll do that next week. What do you want to see? What do you want to see me talk about? Because it's more important that I give you guys content you're interested in than being heard. I'm too old and there's too many pictures of my ass on the internet to be worried about being seen and being heard anymore. I want to do stuff that's relevant for you guys. So let me know. Sorry this was longer, but there was a lot to get through and it was kind of nuanced. And thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.